Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Red Raptor Writes. Because you read the title and saw the thumbnail for this video, you already know that today I'll be analyzing one of the greatest films ever made, a film that really needs no introduction, Jaws. Anybody who's seen Jaws or knows about it understands that Jaws is special. From a historic viewpoint, Spielberg's thriller changed the landscape of cinema forever, being considered the first blockbuster in which moviegoers lined whole city blocks waiting to see it. Jaws wasn't just a movie, but an event. It was the original Endgame, where millions of people flocked to theaters to watch it and talk about it with friends. At least that's what I've read. I can't say for sure because I didn't exist yet. Steven Spielberg's masterpiece even went on to win Academy Awards for Best Film Editing, Sound Mixing, and Original Score. And it was nominated for Best Picture. Jaws saw so much financial and critical acclaim. To this day, it is still a beloved classic. But why? Ever since the beginning of film itself, there have been hundreds of creature features. Before Jaws, audiences saw The Blob, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Them, and even Attack of the Crab Monsters. Yes, I sat down and watched a movie about telepathic crabs. Even over the past decade have come so many terrible sci-fi movies that might only reach so bad they're good if lucky. That or you get Mega Shark vs. Mecha Shark. So what makes Jaws different? Why is the film adaptation of Peter Benchley's novel so much better than all the garbage that came before and after it? What makes Jaws so special? Let's dig this up. There are three major aspects of Jaws that elevate it from another schlocky monster movie to a timeless masterpiece. These are A, the characters, B, the setting, and C, the shark itself. Of course, I'll be starting with A like a normal person, the characters. Screenwriters Peter Benchley and Carl Gottlieb, I have no idea how to say that, instantly set their work apart by making it a more character-driven story as opposed to a plot-driven one. I should discuss the difference before I dive into Jaws, shouldn't I? Well, being character-driven means that the story is centered around a character and how they develop over time. It's the main character's actions and decisions that drive the story. Being character-driven is basically synonymous with active protagonists, characters who act upon the story instead of the story acting upon them. Plot-driven ones are focused on some conflict outside of the character that they happen to be a part of. They're not inherently worse than character-driven stories, but can easily fall into the trap of making passive protagonists who treat their circumstances as a fun ride until it ends, letting the story take them wherever without much agency. Most creature features and horror movies are like this and find themselves with boring passive protagonists who do nothing more than survive or at most try to stop the monster from whatever its goals are. Take Child's Play for instance. The first three movies are just a repeat of Chucky trying to take over a kid's body and the protagonist trying to stop him. Chucky's motivations drive the story instead of Andy's. Child's Play has the good fortune of a hilarious lead in Brad Dourif and some suspenseful scenes because nobody's writing about how great Andy is. To be fair though, Spielberg's much later work Jurassic Park is more plot-driven and is still one of my favorite films, so being more character-driven isn't the only way to achieve greatness. I'll talk more about the shark later, but the villain of Jaws is written as a constant force of nature. Oceanographic expert Matt Hooper explains territoriality, the theory that sharks will stay so long as there's a food source. Unlike Chucky and Godzilla and giant crab monsters, the Great White isn't given any motivation. It doesn't want anything. It has no goals. The justification of territoriality just makes it act as a constant. This shifts the focus from the antagonist to the protagonists. It's about the actions of characters that we're focused on, not the shark. Because there's a much higher focus on characters, a lot more detail, personality, and nuance is given to them as opposed to your typical horror stand-ins. Steven Spielberg's main goal when inviting writers onto the project was for them to make the characters far more likable than their novel counterparts. Needless to say, it worked. So let's talk about those heroes who were made so interesting. The main protagonist is the chief of police on Amity Island, Martin Brody. Chief Brody represents the everyman in Jaws. He's not a member of the Amity Island elite. He's no working class fisherman, and he's no hero cop. He's just an average city cop who got tired of the constant urban problems, so he moved to a small town where he can be the hero and make a difference for once. The opportunity comes once the shark attacks begin. The problem is, Brody really has no idea what he's doing. He spent his whole life in the city, and for the months spent on Amity, he's mostly had to deal with menial tasks. The worst problem on the island used to be kids karate chopping picket fences. All this layered on top of the fact that our hero for Jaws is afraid of the ocean, so he has little to no experience in boating, fishing, or sharks. Jaws does something very interesting with Brody. It starts off with the main protagonist as decently active, but not active enough. After waking up to the bad news of a shark attack, Brody goes to the beach to look at Chrissy Watkins' remains, files a report, and buys the materials himself to make a beaches closed sign. So already, Martin is far more involved than most horror movie protagonists, but ultimately gets swayed to reconsider by Mayor Larry Vaughn, the newspaper editor and medical examiner. The chief folds, and because of this, the Great White kills its next victim, a boy named Alex Kidner. Martin Brody has been an active protagonist up to this point, but it wasn't enough. He wanted to make an actual difference in the community, but still fell short. For this, he beats himself up.
No, please, have mercy!
Later, after the tiger shark is caught, and Hooper finds the tooth of the white shark, Chief Brody tries again and fails again to have the beaches closed. But this time he tries even harder to protect beachgoers by maximizing security. After yet another man becomes lunch,
God damn, Jimmy, this some serious gourmet shit.
He gets all the leverage and forces Mayor Vaughn to close the beaches and hire Quint for 10 grand. Brody, although totally inexperienced and deathly afraid of the ocean, is still willing to jump on the Orca with Quint and Hooper to see this through to the end. Even if his lack of experience means that he'll basically be babysat for a few days, it's still worth it to him. Brody turns himself from folding and unwilling to put his foot down, active but not active enough, to willing to face his fears to take down the most fearsome ocean predator himself. A clear distinction from the passive, cliché action heroes of the genre. Okay, that's enough of Brody for now. Anything more there is to say about him will be addressed later in the video. Let's move on to Matt Hooper, the oceanographer. In your typical monster movie, you need that one scientific guy who can explain all the fake science to the audience, and this often leads to a boring character. Hooper doesn't fall into this trap, thankfully. He fills this role well, and it helps that a lot of the science he spouts actually makes sense and is therefore easy to follow.
Professor Exposition, explainer of things. He's clarifying plot points to explain away confusion!
The second of the main trio we're properly introduced to, Hooper very quickly becomes just as likable, if not more than Brody. Man, Spielberg was working overtime if he got these guys to be this enjoyable on screen because, oof. Unlike Brody, who isn't very knowledgeable on sharks, and Quint, who just wants to kill them, Hooper has a deep fascination with them. This is established early on as he puts his knowledge to good use, and before he and Brody open the tiger shark, Richard Dreyfuss acts perfectly when he tells the story of how his love for sharks began.
I turned around and I actually saw my boat being taken apart, and ever since then, I have been studying sharks.
I know this dude's just acting, but he looks so passionate and giddy doing so. That's another great thing about Jaws, believable performances. The writers prevent Hooper from getting stale by making him the center of one of the movie's biggest conflicts, the old ways versus the new, tradition versus reason, intelligence versus ignorance. This isn't to say the old ways are always bad, there's a lot to be learned from old people, but there are plenty of outdated beliefs that still live on through them, and many times they don't take advancements seriously. This leads us to the now worn out phrase, okay boomer. Matt Hooper is on the science and technology side of things. Despite proving his wits and even physical capabilities over and over again, the people of Amity Island and then Quint still look down on him. Even if he is the most capable man we meet in the film, Hooper is constantly belittled. The tiger shark scene serves as a perfect example. These fishermen from who knows where are celebrating the catch of a lifetime, a massive tiger shark, but they don't even know what it is. When Hooper tells them, well, this is their reaction.
I have no knowledge of any of this. This is so bizarre.
Everyone thinks this is the man-eating shark who's been terrorizing the beaches, but Hooper finds that the size of its bite doesn't match that found on Chrissy's remains. Despite a clear observation that potentially discredits their beliefs, the fishermen refuse to listen to reason. Once the main cast boards the orca, Quint too just mocks the technology Hooper brings on board and never passes an opportunity to rag on him.
Yeah, that's real fine, expensive gear you brought out here, Mr. Hooper. But I don't know what that bastard shark's gonna do with it. Might eat it, I suppose.
We also see a class divide here too, with Hooper being a rich scientist and Quint not starving, but certainly not drowning in wealth, so he doesn't think this rich college boy is up to the task. This brings us to Quint, who I can really only describe as Quint. Our mutton-chopped hero represents the old ways of doing things. He's a very experienced shark hunter who's seen things that would ruin any normal man's psyche.
Have you ever heard a sea monkey scream, Chief? 'Tis a high-pitched, almost annoying kind of sound.
On the shark hunt, Quint sticks to the tried and true ways of shark hunting, refusing Hooper's advice and methods. You might be tempted to hate him or weed it out from his creepy uncle vibes, but like Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw gives such a compelling performance, even though they despised each other funnily enough. Us audiences, along with Matt and Martin, are introduced to Quint's outer shell, how he tries to present himself, a tough old shark killer who sings sea shanties while living the wildlife. After a long day of shark chasing, he and Hooper bond over the stories behind their scars. The tension diffuses between the two, while Quint sees how tough Hooper can be. During this scene, we see him begin to open up in what is the greatest monologue put to screen, the Indianapolis speech.
Thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up. Bobbed up and down in the water. It was like a kind of top. Upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist.
The facade lifts, leaving us with the shattered remains of a man who's been taking out his anger on sharks. Something I love about Spielberg is his subtle character work. He doesn't need the characters to blurt out what they're thinking or how they've grown.
My shields are probably better protection than the ship. I should stay here with Jack.
That's my girl.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more!
In his movies, characters use actions, not words, to show their feelings. Soon after blowing the engine and watching the Carcharodon swim with ease with 3 barrels on it, Quint starts asking Hooper about the fancy tech he kept making fun of, the poison and the shark tank. Again, Quint never flat out says, "Okay Hooper, I'm sorry for how I treated you, maybe you were right and I was wrong, and now this stuff is our only hope." No! He just asks Hooper about it, then follows his lead. Martin too, during the scars scene, lifts his shirt and looks at one of his own scars but dismisses the idea of sharing it. Maybe his scar is only surgical. Maybe it makes for a lame story. Or maybe, just maybe, it has something to do with why he's so afraid of the ocean. We never know for sure, but can only guess what's going through Brody's head. Even the mayor receives this kind of treatment.
Martin. My kids were on that beach too.
There is so much of this subtle character work that makes these characters so dang engaging. The filmmakers treat their audiences with respect, not needing to explain everything, and it pays off. Before I get to the shark, I think it's necessary to discuss what is the most overlooked aspect of Jaws. Everyone talks about concealing the shark, everyone talks about the soundtrack, but I haven't seen anyone really talk about the setting. A fascinating setting is something that is overlooked far too often, and especially by science fiction popcorn flicks. Take Godzilla for instance.
Not that one. Not that one.
The 1998 Godzilla takes place in what was then present-day New York. Like many disaster movies, it's set here because filmmakers get such a high from destroying famous landmarks. Isn't that cool, everyone? Isn't this movie so cool? Godzilla would be no different if it took place in Seattle or Chicago. Maybe you'd hear gunshots in the background, but you get what I mean. New York just had the most and the coolest landmarks, but I'm probably biased on that one. So many films do this and overlook how much a setting can contribute to crafting an amazing narrative, but not Jaws. Nothing about the movie would work if it weren't for the setting to contextualize it all. The Great White has settled off the shores of a place called Amity Island, a small summer town on the New England coast. Within the canon of the film, it's one of those beach resort towns where tourists flock to in summer for some fun and skinny dipping. But for this reason, the local economy is dependent on summertime tourism. The island has a bright, happy exterior to attract guests. We see cute beach houses, a tightly knit community, and a billboard of a woman happily surfing, before it was vandalized. Heck, Mayor Vaughn even points out on television that Amity literally means friendship, but under the sun-shiny exterior lies a darker side to Amity. Right after the thrilling opening, we get a short day in the life sequence of our main protagonist. After waking up next to his wife, we get small banter between the two, as Martin jokingly practices his New England Amity accent, to which Ellen quips that he sounds like he's from New York. Again, it comes across as playful husband and wife banter, but as Jaws progresses, we get a sense for why someone would actually want to consider faking an accent. Amity Island is a small beach town, but instead of the close and friendly personality it tries to give off, the community acts more like an exclusive club.
Listen, all I want to know, I just want to know one simple thing. When do I get to become an islander?
Ellen, never. You're not born here, you're not an islander. That's it.
Anyone born there gets the exemplary title of Islander, while everyone else is just some other. Islanders wear their title as a badge of pride, while outsiders aren't given the same level of respect. These people are very nativist, which quickly takes the form of distrust of Chief Brody and Hooper too once he arrives. Even as the chief of police and one of two officers we see on Amity, you can tell that the residents and the leadership refuse to take him seriously. The nativism progresses straight into anti-intellectualism. Brody announcing he'll close the beaches within a heartbeat gets ignored as the mayor, hoping to appease the residents and small business owners, declares that they'll only be closed for 24 hours. Immediately when Hooper arrives, he's ignored and mocked by everyone on the island. Even for something as simple as suggesting not to overload a small boat, he's shooed off. So when it comes to things even more important like the bite radius of the tiger shark, the residents are bound not to listen. People believe what they want to believe, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. Excuses were still made in order to spare a particular viewpoint. The medical examiner on the island changed his testimony from his original idea of a shark attack to a more digestible one, that Chrissy was killed by a propeller in a boating accident. Even when Hooper held the easily recognizable triangular tooth of a great white in his hand, this expert was ignored and ridiculed. Amity gets repaid for its harsh nativism though, in morbidly satisfying comeuppance. To be fair, the brilliant way the setting is set up makes you understand where the elites are coming from. Brody is new to the town, and it's obvious he's afraid of water. Also, the entire economy depends on this season. Should the whole island collapse into poverty because one new hydrophobic cop jumped to conclusions? The circumstances make this story feel so plausible in a way that Jaws wouldn't if it occurred at Cape Cod or Myrtle Beach, or anywhere with experienced politicians and law enforcement. This is why the setting of Amity Island definitely shouldn't be overlooked as a key ingredient to the greatness of Jaws. Now it's finally time to talk about the Great White who scared beachgoers for 45 years. The Great White Shark is hands down the most intimidating antagonist ever put to screen. As a quick side note, you may have noticed that I only refer to it as the Shark or the Great White, because only uninformed losers who haven't actually watched the film refer to it as Jaws. Jaws is the name of the movie, people, not the shark. Nobody refers to it as Jaws within the film itself because that would be moronic. Who names a wanted animal who's killed 4 people going on 5? Also, I only call the villain an it because the gender is never stated, although the massive body size probably means it's a girl. Anyways, if you're anything like me and spend hours of your day watching reviews and video essays, then it's likely you've heard 1,000 times by now how brilliant it was to not show the shark for the first half of the masterpiece. And you've heard it 700 times now that this just happened to be an act of divine providence, because Spielberg would have shown much more shark if the darn animatronic Bruce actually worked. Both observations are very true, but hopefully I can provide something more fulfilling. The Great White and Spielberg's handling of it is amazing for a variety of reasons. What Jaws does so brilliantly is putting you into the perspective of the characters. It isn't just not seeing the shark that builds suspense, but the point of view that Spielberg so perfectly captures. When you look out into the ocean, what do you see? Just the surface, only what's above the waves. But you know there are thousands of feet below, fathoms upon fathoms of ocean, containing bizarre creatures. Marine biologists are still discovering new species down in the depths. When you swim the ocean, you're completely exposing yourselves to all these creatures you can't see. It's that fear of the unknown that grabs a hold of you. Realistically though, the only thing you have to fear at the beach are old men who think it's okay to let their moobs flap around for everyone else to see. However, that fear of the unknown still lingers. Not showing off the film's antagonist is great because it preserves that fear. Anyone who's been to an aquarium or who's watched a nature documentary will tell you that sharks themselves aren't very scary. They're actually really cute, only being much scarier when left up to our imagination. Lots of creature features take the wrong approach and try to show off their special effects to the audience like if that's the ingredient to a good movie. The events of the film occur mostly through the perspective of Chief Brody, who doesn't know what kind of shark he's facing, how massive it is, how it hunts, or anything like that. Not even Hooper knows what he's dealing with until we get our first grand look at the Great White. Us audience members have to learn about it along with our leads. There are only 2 shark scenes in the entire movie where Brody isn't present, and neither of them give any more insight. So 95% of Jaws is shown from the perspective of a character who fears the ocean and knows very little about what's below the surface. Okay, so when walking in blind, we know we're watching a shark movie, so obviously it won't be a boating accident like Martin is told. After the second victim though, we still don't know what kind of shark it is. It may very well be a tiger, bull, or oceanic white tip, for all we know. It's never established that the threat is a great white until Hooper finds its tooth, giving the identity away. And again, we don't get to see it in full until the trio does. Just as Bruce Campbell brilliantly said,
"It helps maintain the illusion."
What's especially impressive is how well Steven Spielberg is able to make up for not using an animatronic. I say make up, but maintaining the illusion is far better than the alternative. He uses every trick imaginable to imply that there's a shark. Of course, he uses the camera from the underwater shark perspective. We get to see pools of blood springing up in the ocean. Then there's that scene where the 2 guys try to catch a shark with one of their wife's holiday roast. Once they inevitably fail, the broken off section of the pier is used to imply the location of the shark. Now, whether the shark is actually swimming towards the guy or it's all just our imagination is one of the great mysteries of cinema, but whether or not the shark does chase them, so much tension is accomplished with just a pile of wood and John Williams' epic score. Also, during and after the 4th of July, once we know it's a great white, we get that classic shark dorsal fin knifing through the water. Although very rarely observed in nature, it's become an iconic visual that menacingly shows us the movement of the shark without actually giving it away. Genius. And finally, even after we've seen our enemy in full, Spielberg still substitutes the animatronic several times with barrels instead. Who knew 3 bright yellow, funny looking barrels bobbing in the water could cause so much tension? That just goes to show how what's left up to our imagination can be so much more frightening than reality. On a different note, some longtime fans may remember that nearly 2 years ago now, oh my gosh, I'm getting old, I released a similar video on Jurassic Park's Velociraptor, how 18 years after Jaws, Steven Spielberg was still employing similar tactics to make us dread the antagonist. Something he likes to do is play with our expectations. In Jurassic Park, he gave us key insight into the dinosaurs early on, building our expectations, and then he crafted suspenseful scenes around those expectations. In Jaws though, Spielberg and the writers do the opposite. In order to show how truly awesome the shark is, they build up expectations on the shark's limits and then tear them down, making it look more capable and menacing than anyone would have suspected. Shortly after setting sail, Quint explains what the barrels are for and tells a short story of how he attached 2 to a 16-footer, capsizing it. So it's established that 2 is the limit and then they die. Simple. So then you can imagine how absolutely floored the crew are when this particular shark is able to sink 3 no problem. They attach the great white to the orca in order to drag it to shore, but the protagonists get dragged instead. Next, Quint tries to lure it to shore, but blows the engine in an effort to outpace the enemy. Early on their boat trip, once more, Quint says how he likes to trick his prey to the surface, then jab at him. So, as the orca is sinking, what does Brody do? He grabs a spear, climbs the mast, and jabs at the killer shark. You can probably guess the result.
Escalators!
Eels.
The great white shark just gets badder and badder as the adventure progresses, surpassing all expectations. By the end of the trip, you can see the frustration and shock on everyone's face. A darn fish is able to subvert expectations better than Ryan Johnson ever could, so it rightfully earned its place among classic movie villains. Thanks to maintaining the perspective of a man with a case of thalassophobia, clever writing, and bad fortune for Spielberg, good fortune for us, The Great White in Jaws deservedly earned a reputation as the most threatening horror movie foe put on screen. So many schlocky sci-fi films and cheesy horrors assembly lined their way onto our screens ever since the beginning of cinema. Even shark movies specifically have their own subgenre full of garbage. But somehow, we got Jaws. Jaws is special. It had a film production that could have easily ended in complete disaster. Filming was behind schedule, the script was being written on the spot with tons of ad-libbing, actors nearly broke out into fights, and the famous animatronic Bruce barely worked. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, but somehow through divine intervention, everything came together for Jaws to become a timeless masterpiece. Instead of action spectacle about sharks eating people, we get an emotional, character-driven story. Instead of forgettable character stereotypes, we get a lovable trio to root for. Instead of a lifeless stand-in of a setting, we get the gilded Amity Island. And instead of a dumb action movie monster, we get the most fearsome antagonist of our time. That is why Jaws stands out from the trash heap. That is why Jaws is special. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to please leave a like, subscribe, and check out my friends on Plot Twist Entertainment. See you next time.